Hello and welcome back to Bricking It. And today we're going to be having a look around our Forbidden Forest backdrop MOC. So our trunks vary in size from this 2x2 here up through a number of different sizes, being 4, 5 or 6 bricks wide, using these curved panels. A little later in the video we're going to be taking a look at how we assembled these trees and the various techniques we used, but for now let's carry on our tour. The background of the display is made up of black panels of various sizes and shapes. These give us a nice solid back into the display, allowing us to store unused pieces behind it until we need them, and also adds a little depth to the appearance of our build. The build has an overall depth of 24 studs and is 40 studs long, giving us plenty of space to display our scenes. At the front of the display, two 8x16 plates give us plenty of room to display minifigures and other details without crowding back towards the trees too much. There's plenty of display posts under the canopy, enough room for a reasonably sized giant. Got at least 16 bricks of height to set our scenes within the forest. Of course, this backdrop doesn't have to only serve as the Forbidden Forest. Whether you're camping with the family at the Quidditch World Cup, or spending some gloomy alone time trudging up and down the country. The shores of the back lake are the perfect place to catch up with old friends of the family, or maybe to reflect on who you used to be. And when we have this on the workbench, it looks a little cut off at the top, but as you can see, the canopy extends all the way to the shelf above and fits absolutely perfectly where we need it to, alongside Hagrid's hut on our outside display. So here's the display, fully assembled and together, and when it's out on the table, as I say, it does look somewhat cut off. It doesn't look particularly impressive, but it really does fill that space on the shelf, and it does everything I want it to do. So we've got the 32 stud wide by 8 stud deep display space, as well as any space remaining on the tree bases for setting up our scenes. And as we showed earlier, it's not just scenes in the Forbidden Forest, we can do the Quidditch World Cup and all sorts of other scenes in this area. So before we move on and look at each of the bases in detail and then discuss some of the techniques we use to build the trees, just have a look at the underside of the canopy. As you can see, it's made up of various sizes and shapes of green and bright green plates. And we've used some leaf elements with the small seaweed elements stuck in them just to provide some hanging vines. We've got bats hanging up underneath the canopy, just making some use of the top half of the display area. So while this is a permanent in situ display, it's not completely joined permanently, and it's actually 3 separate modules that get displayed up on the shelf. If we look at this first one here, see we've got a half trunk tree and a quarter trunk tree. These form like the back corner of the display against the side wall. This branch on the side, just made with one of these curved bricks, and then a leaf element on top, and that just gives our owl somewhere to perch. These side branches are just built up using various curve slopes and inverted curved slopes, and the short stubby branch obviously has got just this clip and bar to hold a bit of our seaweedy on. The backs are as finished as they need to be. You can see that all of the parts making up the tree trunks just variously in place, and they're not necessarily straight bricks. We can have a look at how the canopy is made up. These are just these little plates with bars on them. They're attached into one of these Nexonite bricks, and then it's one of our branch elements with these tiny 3 leaves and the little 3 sticks attached into them. Move on to our second one. Here you can see again, we don't just use the curved panels. We've actually got a row of bricks in almost every single one of the trees. We've got some of these larger tree limbs as well. We'll have a look at how we made this little detail piece on our 2x2 tree a little later on. You can see again we've got some of these longer branches holding up our canopy where we've got our bats and our vines. Then again the canopy on the front. As we've got all this space at the back, this stack of bricks just marks how high I can go. It's the theoretical maximum limit of the display. And I'm storing a couple of centaurs up here. All of this free plate space is just going to be used to store various elements that are eventually going to be displayed in the forest scene. Obviously there's not always going to be centaurs in our scene, so they can live up here in the forest canopy when they're not in use. As we can see over here, plenty of space to store more elements in the future. So our third base is the largest of the three, and where the first was an inverted corner, this is an outside corner. So you've got one of these large branches moving out at an angle. Some of the ones that are actually integrated into the panels are just truncated because we don't really want too many low branches taking up our space. You can see this tree is the largest of all. It's 6 studs across. It's actually a 3/4 tree. It almost goes around all the way, and then we've got a couple of half trunks at the ends. Again, the canopy is open at the back. Here you can see we've got Aragog stored and Harry and Ron when they go for a visit into the forest. And our back is just unfinished and opened up. Got our height marker, and then Aragog just attaches with a trans-clear brick, which is what I actually used to attach him to the display when he's down in the forest. So switching up to wobbly cam, we're on the shelf and can see this part of the display doesn't go all the way back. We've actually got 8 studs behind the display. Here we can store, as a secondary way of storing parts for this display, behind the modules, and that actually helps space them back from the wall, the 8 studs that we need to keep everything straight. And these pieces all just push in. There's just some gentle alignment. Move these all back into position on the shelf, and by bringing those last 2 display bases in at the front, that completes our display in situ on the shelf. And as you see, it looks much fuller. The shadows created by the canopy hide all the stuff that's stored. We've got the appearance of our forest disappearing back into the wall. And that's how everything looks once it's up on the shelf. So with that tour complete, let's have a look at some of the builds. I'm going to start off with the roots. Now, the roots are fairly easy. I tended to use a variety of slope pieces and inverted arches just to get some minor protrusions coming out of the base of the trees. And these are generally sandwiched between a panel on each side if the roots are coming out the front of the tree. Also use these side on as well for profile roots. Branches are fairly easy. Some of these panels actually come with branch pieces included, but for those where I've added extra branches, I've tended to use these 3 high arches. You do get them in 2 high. They're not always ideal for the situation. I'm going to switch back to this 3 high 2 deep arch. It gives us quite a nice curve, and it's also the same curve as on the integrated branches in the other panels. So using one of these slope pieces and a plate of whatever length you desire, you can actually create a nice profile branch with complementary curves top and bottom, and then just plate out or tile the remaining length of the branch. So we can do these with the 2 high arches, but they don't quite work as well with the plate because of this little curve at the end, and they work better for truncated branches. Some of my truncated branches actually had a tile at the end to give a cut or broken appearance to the branch. Did that by using brackets. As you can see, they don't quite align perfectly with the branch. If we use an inverted one, get a slightly better alignment on the base, but as soon as we add our curve slope on the top, it kind of ruins the illusion of the broken end branch. So for these ones I came up with a different solution. Just put a little 1x1 plate on the back. That could equally well have been a tile. Gives me some more options for dressing the piece. And on this one I've just used a leaf piece in the same olive green as the canopy and a little squirrel. So there's our cut branch. Actually have these out the front of the build mainly so we can see the nice detail on the end of that tile. They do work in profile, but of course you can't then see the printing on the tile. So our trees aren't smooth all the way up. That would be quite a boring look. We want to get a bit of light and shade. So we add some texture using some inverted slopes and some regular slopes. And just create some knobbliness on our trunks. We've added more interest with maybe some stickers on the panels. Maybe the stickers from the Whomping Willow. I haven't gone the sticker route. Just gone for brick built texture and visual interest. These work a little better in profile than coming out of the front of the tree builds. Another way to add some texture is with these snot bricks. And do these in varying lengths. Here I'm going to do 6 studs. I'm going to put some tiles on there, or plates rather, and then tile it off on top. And using these cheese slopes at either end just gives us an extra section of trunk with slightly different profile. You see we use these side on, but again front on. Instead of just a plain tile on the front, you might want to put a jumper and maybe have one of those cut branch elements. Now for our larger branches, we need to start off with 2 studs deep of brick. A lot of this is going to be buried inside the tree. One half plated and one half tiled. So we can add this snot brick and this tilt table up on its side. Then when we bring in our curved panel, you can see that it just sits flush against the outside of the panel. Using some of these 2x2 round bricks attached to our plate. If we tilt it just slightly, not too much so it doesn't disrupt the panel's depth, get a nice large branch. It just changes the angle. It's not completely on the Lego grid, so we get a bit more of a natural look. These branches look even better if you use these large macaroni pieces. And we've got a tile with a hole in and a bar piece. This allows you to angle the branches should you want them going at different directions. Could equally well use an axle and they just sit again. Just using that slight bend in the panel to provide a natural look. So here's our small tree. I'm going to start off with a plate with a stud on top. Onto this we're going to use a snot brick with a stud on 2 opposite sides. A Travis brick or stud brick with a stud on each side also fits inside. We could use that if you've got that available. So I've used a little 1x1 stud with one of those printed elements and a round ended tile on the other side. We're adding a minifig head on top of a 1x1 plate. That's just to make sure that everything is at the right height. So when we put our tree guy costume piece over the top, our minifig head is visible. As you can see, it doesn't completely cover up the armhole spaces. You might want to use some foliage, but I'm going to actually put a bit of foliage on one of these peg pins here, and on the other side just a 1x1 stud with a hole in and another one of our cut branch elements on the end. And of course you can add as many 2x2 round bricks on top as you like to increase the height. Now on this element I've used a glow in the dark brick, but on the main build I actually use a piece from the Dreams theme. So as far as building our canopy goes, we start off with one of these round-ended plates with a bar. I'm just going to use a curved slope just to stop that falling off. Because the weight of a lot of this build is hanging out over the side, we just want to make sure that piece is well secure. Use one of our foliage elements under these 3 leaf pieces and a few little stick plant stem pieces. Now the build for these was largely the same each time. Tended to use 3 of these little twiggy elements scattered at random spots around. Sometimes I put 4, sometimes 5, but generally it was 3. And then every other hole on this foliage piece is filled with one of these 3 leaf elements. I like the variety you get on this by pushing them further or not so far into our element. We get quite a nice varied height. You could vary it even more by changing and mixing up the number of colours you use in your foliage display, but I wanted a fairly uniform look. So it's really just a backdrop and I want people to be focusing on the minifigures in the display. You can see here a nice varied topography. I'm going to use one of these Nexonite arms just on the back. I tend to put this in the middle, but you can offset it depending on the space you want to fill up. It's just going to clip onto our bar, and that allows us to tilt our foliage to our desired angle. You can spin and rotate to fill the gaps that you need to fill. You can even move it side to side a little with that round-ended plate holding it onto our canopy. The underside of the canopy is very simple. Just use some of these smaller foliage elements, and I tend to insert them into the tubes rather than the gaps between. And on these smaller parts of the leaf element, just going to insert these seaweed pieces so they can hang down to give us some hanging vines. You can actually make these as densely populated as you like. I tend to do singles, although in a couple of places I have 2 on an element just for a slightly more varied look. They can just be hanging down, making our canopy look a bit more interesting and more creepy. So those are all the elements we use for the build, and by mixing them up between the various trees we get quite a nice forest. And that's our build. So in future installments I'll be showing you some of the mini builds. You will have noticed the Black Lake shoreline as well as the camping tents. I'll be showing you how I went about building each of those in a future video. All that remains for me to say is thank you very much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave us a like. And if you'd like to see more Wizarding World builds, please subscribe to Bricking It. Bye bye.